Hello everybody, I'm Sam and you're listening to Chilliteracy, where this afternoon, it's Friday, as Lynn correctly pointed out. Late night reading, well, it's, sort of the afternoon, but hopefully bringing the chill moods. Yeah, I'm here for now. Lucy is also present in the room behind me as a ghost, and I'm going to be reading some stuff, and then at some point, don't worry, anyways, you're not late. You've arrived precisely when you're meant to, as everybody says. A lazy Sunday afternoon reading. Extremely that. I am going to try not to bang on about it, but I am very listless today. I am devoid of list. My list has up and gone. So I don't know what I'm getting at the shops later. But before then, I have a couple of stories that I thought I might revisit. I realised last year, listless is a good word for today. It is, thank you. Yeah, it warm, and also I'm just tired. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I'm using Lucy's setup, which seems mostly familiar and ordinary, but guaranteed I'm gonna get confused by something and click on the wrong thing or whatever, because why not act like an old man and suddenly confronted with a slight change. Yeah, you might get some pigeon conversation going on in the background, or magpies, or jackdaws, or light aircraft, or motocross. So that's all. Don't spill water on the PC. What, you mean like this? It's too hot and you're too irritated by everything to do much more than lie around. This is perfect. Let's be listeners. Absolutely, I agree, and I get that. Right, that is some water successfully drunk without spilling it all over the computer. So good. We've proven that the bullying is unnecessary. But yeah, we've got some stories that we have already read on here before, but there's nothing bad with going back and rereading an old story that you've enjoyed. In my case, it may have a contributing factor may have been how small were the books that those stories were written in, such that I could easily throw them in a bag for my travels without having to lug large books across the country. But don't worry about it. Last year we did revisiting stuff from oh, excuse me. Actually, do you have a mute button?
Yeah, same as yours. Right.
No.
Yeah?
Not a...
That's a push to...
Oh, so it does. Right, I thought that would actually... Oh, okay,
yeah,
there we go.
It's not an on and off, it's just a hold.
Oh, weird. Interesting.
Difference in my setup.
Yep, there we go, we found it.
Hi chat, I'm in the background.
Yeah, Lucy's lurking out back here, and it's a condenser mic, so you can probably hear her.
Yeah.
Or something. Had a small kitty issue in the morning. No, finished a reread of the book you started, then you went back to bed. Yeah, I hope the cat's okay. Yeah, kitty's fine, just had to wake up really fast. Oh, I have a rough idea what kind of problem that could be. But yeah, so last year we specifically went back and picked stuff from year one. And this year, I think these are actually not things from year two. I think they're a little bit more recently. Hang on, I've just seen a word on. Did I? No, I think I was okay. I don't think I reworded that. So I'm literally just looking at the text in front of me that I was going to be reading, and I was like, wait, hang on a second. I've not put an amendment for that, but I think that's okay, because yeah, this story mentions a literally second paragraph. It's The Immortal by Mary Shelley is the first one I was thinking I was reading, and the second paragraph mentions the Wandering Jew, and I was like, wait, is that? But no, that's just referring to like a sort of a folklore kind of thing. It just suddenly flagged up as hang on a second, was this like anti-Semitic in some way and I've forgotten it. I don't think it is. I think that's okay. But yeah, I guess now that I've announced it, I'll throw the text into chat. Yeah, these are... I'll be reading a couple from the sort of collection of sci-fi short stories. At least I think I've got time to do two. Speaking of pigeons, Dave's just woke up. Dang. Like 10 minutes late. Good grief. But yeah, I hope we're all well. I don't know that I have really anything else to do or to say or to introduce. I hope everyone is enjoying. That's true. Lucy asks, did we enjoy film night? I mean, I got the impression from the opinions that everyone enjoyed it and would be happy to see more, which I agreed with. I enjoyed doing that. I liked getting to show everyone a film. I'm going to apologise once more for the just awful audio quality, because believe it or not, that film actually had music, which was largely obliterated by the compression. So yeah, next time, that's a lesson learned, to actually check a little bit more of the film. Like I'd checked it to kind of see that it was all there, but not in any great detail, and noticed a bit of audio compression at first, but it seemed to clear up for the speech, but I didn't actually like properly test it all. Yeah, the music was good. But yeah, no, we I think enjoyed getting to show you that film that we'd only recently found ourselves and really enjoyed. And how it itself felt like a sort of horror short story compilation. But yeah, there's just a lot to like in that, and you know, one of my takeaways being that it's kind of held up and aged remarkably well, I think, because there's only really a couple of times where they really went for like special effects of any kind that didn't really land, and one of them was kind of in the very comedic tale of the ghost that couldn't go home. The inexperienced ghost, and the other one is the bus crash at the start, which they're very obviously using models, but aside from that, that was fine. But like, kind of the sort of the big, genuinely like unsettling shot at the end of the ventriloquist dummy standing up and walking across the room, that was really good. That worked really well. So yeah, I enjoyed it, Lucy enjoyed it, and it seemed like everyone enjoyed it. So we should try and find some more things. So it's not going to be like a regular monthly thing, but just like a cool little event that we might try and throw up for the community every now and then on the Discord when we have something, and when it seems like an appropriate time. Not always horror films as well. There's a lot of other films. We don't just want to pigeonhole ourselves into just doing horror things, because again, it's not going to be for everybody. But yeah, I don't know. I guess are we good? Do we want to start? Do we want to have a story? You've got your link there in chat if you'd like. I haven't like reread this one before now, so it's not a cold read, but I made this one earlier, and then we forgot about it, and it's just been sat on the worktop. It's sort of lukewarm. You might want to bung it in the microwave, or possibly throw it out. I don't know. Yeah. Wow, you're even in the room, and I beat you to it. Oh. Well, that saying it in your head doesn't count, does it? That's very polite of you. You're doing it now. Lucy's saying she doesn't realise, because you probably can't hear what she's saying, but saying she doesn't want to interrupt.
Heckling.
Yeah, I'm being. Look, okay, do you want to come over here and read this? No. No, okay. Could you? Right. Anyway, let's get on with our first story, because otherwise we will be here until it is dark. So, if we are all ready, and have clicked through if we want to click through, or not if we don't, then I shall begin. with The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley. July 16th, 1833. This is a memorable anniversary for me. On it, I complete my 323rd year. The Wandering Jew? Certainly not. More than 18 centuries have passed over his head. In comparison with him, I am a very young immortal. Am I, then, immortal? This is a question which I have asked myself by day and night for now 303 years, and yet cannot answer it. I detected a grey hair amidst my brown locks this very day. That surely signifies decay. Yet it may have remained concealed there for 300 years, for some persons have become entirely white-headed before 20 years of age. I will tell my story, and my reader shall judge for me. I will tell my story, and so contrive to pass some few hours of a long eternity become so wearisome to me. Forever. Can it be? To live forever? I have heard of enchantments in which the victims were plunged into a deep sleep, to wake after 100 years as fresh as ever. I have heard of the 7 sleepers. Thus to be immortal would not be so burthensome, but, oh, the weight of never-ending time, the tedious passage of the still succeeding hours. How happy was the fabled Nourjahad. But to my task. All the world has heard of Cornelius Agrippa. His memory is as immortal as his arts have made me. All the world has also heard of his scholar, who, unawares, raised the foul fiend during his master's absence, and was destroyed by him. The report, true or false, of this accident was attended with many inconveniences to the renowned philosopher. All his scholars at once deserted him. His servants disappeared. He had no one near him to put coals on his ever-burning fires while he slept, or to attend to the changeful colours of his medicines while he studied. Experiment after experiment failed, because one pair of hands was insufficient to complete them. The dark spirits laughed at him for not being able to retain a single mortal in his service. I was then very young, very poor, and very much in love. I had been for about a year the pupil of Cornelius, though I was absent when this accident took place. On my return, my friends implored me not to return to the alchemist's abode. I trembled as I listened to the dire tale they told. I required no second warning, and when Cornelius came and offered me a purse of gold if I would remain under his roof, I felt as if Satan himself tempted me. My teeth chattered. My hair stood on end. I ran off as fast as my trembling knees would permit. My failing steps were directed whither for 2 years they had every evening been attracted. A gently bubbling spring of pure living waters, beside which lingered a dark-haired girl, whose beaming eyes were fixed on the path I was accustomed each night to tread. I cannot remember the hour when I did not love Bertha. We had been neighbours and playmates from infancy. Her parents, like mine, were of humble life, yet respectable. Our attachment had been a source of pleasure to them. In an evil hour, a malignant fever carried off both her father and mother, and Bertha became an orphan. She would have found a home beneath my paternal roof, but, unfortunately, the old lady of the near castle, rich, childless, and solitary, declared her intention to adopt her. Henceforth, Bertha was clad in silk, inhabited a marble palace, and was looked on as being highly favoured by fortune. But in her new situation, among her new associates, Bertha remained true to the friend of her humbler days. She often visited the cottage of my father, and when forbidden to go thither, she would stray towards the neighbouring wood and meet me beside its shady fountain. She often declared that she owed no duty to her new protectress equal in sanctity to that which bound us. Yet still I was too poor to marry, and she grew weary of being tormented on my account. She had a haughty but an impatient spirit, and grew angry at the obstacles that prevented our union. We met now, after an absence, and she had been sorely beset while I was away. She complained bitterly and almost reproached me for being poor. I replied hastily, "I am honest if I am poor. Were I not, I might soon become rich." This exclamation produced 1,000 questions. I feared to shock her by owning the truth, but she drew it from me. And then, casting a look of disdain on me, she said, "You pretend to love, and you fear to face the devil for my sake." I protested that I had only dreaded to offend her, while she dwelt on the magnitude of the reward that I should receive. Thus encouraged, shamed by her, led on by love and hope, laughing at my late fears, with quick steps and a light heart, I returned to accept the offers of the alchemist, and was instantly installed in my office. A year passed away. I became possessed of no insignificant sum of money. Custom had banished my fears. In spite of the most painful vigilance, I had never detected the trace of a cloven foot, nor was the studious silence of our abode ever disturbed by demonic hounds. I continued my stolen interviews with Bertha, and hope dawned on me. Hope, but not perfect joy. For Bertha fancied that love and security were enemies, and her pleasure was to divide them in my bosom. Though true of heart, she was somewhat of a coquette in manner, and I was jealous. She slighted me in 1,000 ways, yet would never acknowledge herself to be in the wrong. She would drive me mad with anger and then force me to beg her pardon. Sometimes she fancied that I was not sufficiently submissive, and then she had some story of a rival favoured by her protectress. She was surrounded by silk-clad youths, the rich and gay. What chance had the sad-robed scholar of Cornelius compared with these? On one occasion, the philosopher made such large demands upon my time that I was unable to meet her as I was wont. He was engaged in some mighty work, and I was forced to remain, day and night, feeding his furnaces and watching his chemical preparations. Bertha waited for me in vain at the fountain. Her haughty spirit fired at this neglect, and when at last I stole out during the few short minutes allotted to me for slumber, and hoped to be consoled by her, she received me with disdain, dismissed me in scorn, and vowed that any man should possess her hand rather than he, who could not be in 2 places at once for her sake. She would be revenged, and truly she was. In my dingy retreat I heard that she had been hunting, attended by Albert Hoffer. Albert Hoffer was favoured by her protectress, and the 3 passed in cavalcade before my smoky window. Methought that they mentioned my name. It was followed by a laugh of derision as her dark eyes glanced contemptuously towards my abode. Jealousy, with all its venom and all its misery, entered my breast. Now I shed a torrent of tears. To think that I should never call her mine, and anon I imprecated 1,000 curses on her inconstancy. Yet still I must stir the fires of the alchemist, still attend on the changes of his unintelligible medicines. Cornelius had watched for 3 days and nights, nor closed his eyes. The progress of his alembics was slower than he expected. In spite of his anxiety, sleep weighed upon his eyelids. Again and again he threw off drowsiness with more than human energy. Again and again it stole away his senses, his eyes crucibles wistfully. "Not ready yet," he murmured. "Will another night pass before the work is accomplished? Windsor, you are vigilant, you are faithful, you have slept, my boy, you slept last night. Look at that glass vessel. The liquid it contains is of a soft rose colour. The moment it begins to change its hue, awaken me. Till then I may close my eyes. First it will turn white, and then emit golden flashes, but wait not till then. When the rose colour fades, rouse me." I scarcely heard the last words, muttered as they were in sleep. Even then he did not quite yield to nature. "Whimsy, my boy," he again said, "do not touch the vessel. Do not put it to your lips. It is a filter to cure love. You would not cease to love your Bertha. Beware to drink." And he slept. His venerable head sunk on his breast, and I scarce heard his regular breathing. For a few minutes I watched the vessel. The rosy hue of the liquid remained unchanged. Then my thoughts wandered. They visited the fountain, and dwelt on 1,000 charming scenes never to be renewed. Never. Serpents and adders were in my heart as the word never half formed itself on my lips. False girl, false and cruel. Never more would she smile on me as that evening she smiled on Albert. Worthless, detested woman. I would not remain unrevenged. She should see Albert expire at her feet. She should die beneath my vengeance. She had smiled in disdain and triumph. She knew my wretchedness and her power. Yet what power had she? The power of exciting my hate, my utter scorn, all but indifference. Could I attain that? Could I regard her with careless eyes, transferring my rejected love to one fairer and more true, that were indeed a victory? A bright flash darted before my eyes. I had forgotten the medicine of the adept. I gazed on it with wonder. Flashes of admirable beauty, more bright than those which the diamond emits when the sun's rays are on it, glanced from the surface of the liquid. An odour the most fragrant and grateful stole over my senses. The vessel seemed one globe of living radiance, lovely to the eye, and most inviting to the taste. The first thought, instinctively inspired by the grosser sense, was, I must drink. I raised the vessel to my lips. It will cure me of love, of torture. Already I had quaffed half of the most delicious liquor ever tasted by the palate of man, when the philosopher stirred. I started. I dropped the glass. The fluid flamed and glanced along the floor, while I felt Cornelius's gripe at my throat, as he shrieked aloud, "Wretch, you have destroyed the labour of my life!" The philosopher was totally unaware that I had drunk any portion of his drug. His idea was, and I gave a tacit assent to it, that I had raised the vessel from curiosity, and that, frightened at its brightness, and the flashes of intense light it gave forth, I had let it fall. I never undeceived him. The fire of the medicine was quenched. The fragrance died away. He grew calm, as a philosopher should under the heaviest trials, and dismissed me to rest. I will not attempt to describe the sleep of glory and bliss which bathed my soul in paradise during the remaining hours of that memorable night. Words would be faint and shallow types of my enjoyment, or of the gladness that possessed my bosom when I woke. I trod air. My thoughts were in heaven. Earth appeared heaven, and my inheritance upon it was to be one trance of delight. This is to be cured of love, I thought. I will see Bertha this day, and she will find her lover cold and regardless, too happy to be disdainful, yet how utterly indifferent to her. The hours danced away. The philosopher, secure that he had once succeeded and believing that he might again, began to concoct the same medicine once more. He was shut up with his books and drugs, and I had a holiday. I dressed myself with care. I looked in an old but polished shield which served me for a mirror. Methought my good looks had wonderfully improved. I hurried beyond the precincts of the town, joy in my soul, the beauty of heaven and earth around me. I turned my steps towards the castle. I could look on its lofty turrets with lightness of heart, for I was cured of love. my Bertha saw me, afar off as I came up the avenue. I know not what sudden impulse animated her bosom, but at the sight she sprung with a light fawn-like bound down the marble steps and was hastening towards me. But I had been perceived by another person. The old, high-born hag who called herself her protectress and was her tyrant had seen me also. She hobbled, panting, up the terrace. A page, as ugly as herself, held up her train and fanned her as she hurried along, and stopped my fair girl with a, "How now, my bold mistress, whither so fast? Back to your cage. Hawks are abroad." Bertha clasped her hands. Her eyes were still bent on my approaching figure. I saw the contest. How I abhorred the old crone who checked the kind impulses of my Bertha's softening heart. Hitherto, respect for her rank had caused me to avoid the lady of the castle. Now I disdained such trivial considerations. I was cured of love and lifted above all human fears. I hastened forwards and soon reached the terrace. How lovely Bertha looked, her eyes flashing fire, her cheeks glowing with impatience and anger. She was 1,000 times more graceful and charming than ever. I no longer loved. Oh, no, I adored, worshipped, idolized her. She had that morning been persecuted with more than usual vehemence to consent to an immediate marriage with my rival. She was reproached with the encouragement that she had shown him. She was threatened with being turned out of doors with disgrace and shame. Her proud spirit rose in arms at the threat, but when she remembered the scorn that she had heaped upon me, and how, perhaps, she had thus lost one whom she now regarded as her only friend, she wept with remorse and rage. At that moment I appeared. "Oh, Windsy," she exclaimed, "take me to your mother's cot. Swiftly let me leave the detested luxuries and wretchedness of this noble dwelling. Take me to poverty and happiness." I clasped her in my arms with transport. The old lady was speechless with fury, and broke forth into invective only when we were far on our road to my natal cottage. My mother received the fair fugitive, escaped from a gilt cage to nature and liberty, with tenderness and joy. My father, who loved her, welcomed her heartily. It was a day of rejoicing which did not need the addition of the celestial potion of the alchemist to steep me in delight. Soon after this eventful day, I became the husband of Bertha. I ceased to be the scholar of Cornelius, but I continued his friend. I always felt grateful to him for having, unawares, procured me that delicious draught of a divine elixir which, instead of curing me of love, sad, cure, solitary and joyless remedy for evils which seemed blessings to the memory, had inspired me with courage and resolution, thus winning for me an inestimable treasure in my Bertha. I often called to mind that period of trance-like inebriation with wonder. The drink of Cornelius had not fulfilled the task for which he affirmed that it had been prepared, but its effects were more potent and blissful than words can express. They had faded by degrees, yet they lingered long, and painted life in hues of splendour. Bertha often wondered at my lightness of heart and unaccustomed gaiety, for, before, I had been rather serious or even sad in my disposition. She loved me the better for my cheerful temper, and our days were winged by joy. 5 years afterwards, I was suddenly summoned to the bedside of the dying Cornelius. He had sent for me in haste, conjuring my instant presence. I found him stretched on his pallet, enfeebled even to death. All of life that yet remained animated his piercing eyes, and they were fixed on a glass vessel full of roseate liquid. "Behold," he said in a broken and inward voice, "the vanity of human wishes. A second time my hopes are about to be crowned. A second time they are destroyed. Look at that liquor. You remember 5 years ago I had prepared the same, with the same success. Then, as now, my thirsting lips expected to taste the immortal elixir. You dashed it from me, and at present it is too late. He spoke with difficulty, and fell back on his pillow. I could not help saying, "How, revered master, can a cure for love restore you to life?" A faint smile gleamed across his face as I listened earnestly to his scarcely intelligible answer. A cure for love, and for all things. The elixir of immortality. Ah, if now I might drink, I should live forever. As he spoke, a golden flash gleamed from the fluid. A well-remembered fragrance stole over the air. He raised himself, all weak as he was. Strength seemed miraculously to re-enter his frame. He stretched forth his hand. A loud explosion startled me. A ray of fire shot up from the elixir, and the glass vessel which contained it was shivered to atoms. I turned my eyes towards the philosopher. He had fallen back. His eyes were glassy, his features rigid. He was dead. But I lived, and was to live forever. So said the unfortunate alchemist, and for a few days I believed his words. I remembered the glorious drunkenness that had followed my stolen draught. I reflected on the change I had felt in my frame, in my soul. The bounding elasticity of the one, the buoyant lightness of the other. I surveyed myself in a mirror, and could perceive no change in my features during the space of the 5 years which had elapsed. I remembered the radiant hues and grateful scent of that delicious beverage, worthy the gift it was capable of bestowing. I was, then, immortal. A few days after that, I laughed at my credulity. The old proverb that a prophet is least regarded in his own country was true with respect to me and my defunct master. I loved him as a man. I respected him as a sage, but I derided the notion that he could command the powers of darkness, and laughed at the superstitious fears with which he was regarded by the vulgar. He was a wise philosopher, but had no acquaintance with any spirits but those clad in flesh and blood. His science was simply human, and human science, I soon persuaded myself, could never conquer nature's laws so far as to imprison the soul forever within its carnal habitation. Cornelius had brewed a soul-refreshing drink, more inebriating than wine, sweeter and more fragrant than any fruit. It possessed probably strong medicinal powers, imparting gladness to the heart and vigour to the limbs, but its effects would wear out. Already they diminished in my frame. I was a lucky fellow to have quaffed health and joyous spirits and perhaps long life at my master's hands, but my good fortune ended there. Longevity was different from immortality. I continued to entertain this belief for many years. Sometimes a thought stole across me. Was the alchemist indeed deceived? But my habitual credence was that I should meet the fate of all the children of Adam at my appointed time, a little late, but still at a natural age. Yet it was certain that I retained a wonderfully youthful look. I was laughed at for my vanity in consulting the mirror so often, but consulted it in vain. My brow was untrenched. My cheeks, my eyes, my whole person continued as untarnished as in my 20th year. I was troubled. I looked at the faded beauty of Bertha. I seemed more like her son. By degrees our neighbours began to make similar observations, and I found at last that I went by the name of the scholar bewitched. Bertha herself grew uneasy. She became jealous and peevish, and at length she began to question me. We had no children. We were all in all to each other. And though As she grew older, her vivacious spirit became a little allied to ill temper, and her beauty sadly diminished. I cherished her in my heart as the mistress I had idolized, the wife I had sought and won with such perfect love. At last, our situation became intolerable. Bertha was 50. I was 20 years of age. I had, in very shame, in some measure adopted the habits of a more advanced age. I no longer mingled in the dance among the young and gay, but my heart bounded along with them while I restrained my feet, and a sorry figure I cut among the nesters of our village. But before the time I mention, things were altered. We were universally shunned. We were, at least I was, reported to have kept up an iniquitous acquaintance with some of my former master's supposed friends. Poor Bertha was pitied, but deserted. I was regarded with horror and detestation. What was to be done? We sat by our winter fire. Poverty had made itself felt, for none would buy the produce of my farm, and often I had been forced to journey 20 miles to some place where I was not known, to dispose of our property. It was true we had saved something for an evil day. That day was come. We sat by our lone fireside, the old-hearted youth and his antiquated wife. Again, Bertha insisted on knowing the truth. She recapitulated all she had ever heard about me and added her own observations. She conjured me to cast off the spell. She described how much more comely grey hairs were than my chestnut locks. She descanted on the reverence and respect due to age, how preferable to the slight regard paid to mere children. Could I imagine that the despicable gifts of youth and good looks outweighed disgrace, hatred, and scorn? Nay, in the end I should be burnt as a dealer in the black art, while she, to whom I had not deigned to communicate any portion of my good fortune, might be stoned as my accomplice. At length, she insinuated that I must share my secret with her, and bestow on her like benefits to those I myself enjoyed, or she would denounce me. And then she burst into tears. Thus beset, methought it was the best way to tell the truth. I revealed it as tenderly as I could, and spoke only of a very long life, not of immortality, which representation indeed coincided best with my own ideas. When I ended, I rose and said, "And now, my Bertha, will you denounce the lover of your youth? You will not, I know, but it is too hard, my poor wife, that you should suffer from my ill luck and the accursed arts of Cornelius. I will leave you. You have wealth enough, and friends will return in my absence. I will go. Young as I seem, and strong as I am, I can work and gain my bread among strangers, unsuspected and unknown. I loved you in youth. God is my witness that I would not desert you in age, but that your safety and happiness require it." I took my cap and moved toward the door. In a moment Bertha's arms were round my neck and her lips were pressed to mine. "No, my husband, my Winsey," she said, "you shall not go alone. Take me with you. We will remove from this place, and, as you say, among strangers we shall be unsuspected and safe. I am not so very old as quite to shame you, my Winsey, and I dare say the charm will soon wear off, and, with the blessing of God, you will become more elderly looking, as is fitting. You shall not leave me." I returned the good soul's embrace heartily. "I will not, my Bertha, but for your sake I had not thought of such a thing. I will be your true, faithful husband while you are spared to me, and do my duty by you to the last." The next day, we prepared secretly for our emigration. We were obliged to make great pecuniary sacrifices. It could not be helped. We realized a sum sufficient at least to maintain us while Bertha lived, and without saying adieu to anyone, quitted our native country to take refuge in a remote part of western France. It was a cruel thing to transport poor Bertha from her native village and the friends of her youth to a new country, new language, new customs. Excuse me. The strange secret of my destiny rendered this removal immaterial to me, but I compassionated her deeply and was glad to perceive that she found compensation for her misfortunes in a variety of little ridiculous circumstances. Away from all telltale chroniclers, she sought to decrease the apparent disparity of our ages by 1,000 feminine arts, rouge, youthful dress, and assumed juvenility of manner. I could not be angry. Did not I myself wear a mask? Why quarrel with hers because it was less successful? I grieved deeply when I remembered that this was my Bertha, whom I had loved so fondly and won with such transport. The dark-eyed, dark-haired girl, with smiles of enchanting archness and a step like a fawn, this mincing, simpering, jealous old woman. I should have revered her grey locks and withered cheeks, but thus it was my work, I knew. I did not the less deplore this type of human weakness. Her jealousy never slept. Her chief occupation was to discover that, in spite of outward appearances, I was myself growing old. I verily believe that the poor soul loved me truly in her heart, but never had woman so tormenting a mode of displaying fondness. She would discern wrinkles in my face and decrepitude in my walk, while I bounded along in youthful vigour, the youngest looking of 20 youths. I never dared address another woman. On one occasion, fancying that the belle of the village regarded me with favouring eyes, she bought me a grey wig. Her constant discourse among her acquaintances was that though I looked so young, there was ruin at work within my frame, and she affirmed that the worst symptom about me was my apparent health. My youth was a disease, she said, and I ought at all times to prepare, if not for a sudden and awful death, at least to wake some morning white-headed, and bowed down with all the marks of advanced years. I let her talk. I often joined in her conjectures. Her warnings chimed in with my never-ceasing speculations concerning my state, and I took an earnest, though painful, interest in listening to all that her quick wit and excited imagination could say on the subject. Why dwell on these minute circumstances? We lived on for many long years. Bertha became bedrid and paralytic. I nursed her as a mother might a child. She grew peevish, and still harped upon one string of how long I should survive her. It has ever been a source of consolation to me that I performed my duty scrupulously towards her. She had been mine in youth, she was mine in age, and at last, when I heaped the sod over her corpse, I wept to feel that I had lost all that really bound me to humanity. Since then, how many have been my cares and woes, how few and empty my enjoyments. I pause here in my history. I will pursue it no further. A sailor without rudder or compass, tossed on a stormy sea, a traveller lost on a wide-spread heath without landmark or star to guide him. Such have I been, more lost, more hopeless than either. A nearing ship, a gleam from some far cot may save them, but I have no beacon except the hope of death. Death, mysterious, ill-visaged friend of weak humanity, why alone of all mortals have you cast me from your sheltering fold? Oh, for the peace of the grave, the deep silence of the iron-bound tomb, that thought would cease to work in my brain, and my heart beat no more with emotions varied only by new forms of sadness. Am I immortal? I return to my first question. In the first place, is it not more probable that the beverage of the alchemist was fraught rather with longevity than eternal life? Such is my hope. And then be it remembered that I only drank half of the potion prepared by him. Was not the whole necessary to complete the charm? To have drained half the elixir of immortality is but to be half immortal. My forever is thus truncated and null. But again, who shall number the years of the half of eternity? I often try to imagine by what rule the infinite may be divided. Sometimes I fancy age advancing upon me. One grey hair I have found. Fool. Do I lament? Yes, the fear of age and death often creeps coldly into my heart, and the more I live, the more I dread death, even while I abhor life. Such an enigma is man, born to perish, when he wars as I do against the established laws of his nature. But for this anomaly of feeling, surely I might die. The medicine of the alchemist would not be proof against fire, sword, and the strangling waters. I have gazed upon the blue depths of many a placid lake, and the tumultuous rushing of many a mighty river, and have said, peace inhabits those waters. Yet I have turned my steps away, to live yet another day. I have asked myself whether suicide would be a crime in one to whom thus only the portals of the other world could be opened. I have done all except presenting myself as a soldier or a duelist, an object of destruction to not my fellow mortals, and therefore I have shrunk away. They are not my fellows. The inextinguishable power of life in my frame and their ephemeral existence place us wide as the poles asunder. I could not raise a hand against the meanest or the most powerful among them. Thus I have lived on for many a year, alone and weary of myself, desirous of death yet never dying, a mortal immortal. Neither ambition nor avarice can enter my mind, and the ardent love that gnaws at my heart never to be returned, never to find an equal on which to expend itself, lives there only to torment me. This very day I conceived a design by which I may end all, without self-slaughter, without making another man a Cain, an expedition which mortal frame can never survive, even endued with the youth and strength that inhabits mine. Thus I shall put my immortality to the test, and rest for ever, or return, the wonder and benefactor of the human species. Before I go, a miserable vanity has caused me to pen these pages. I would not die and leave no name behind. 3 centuries have passed since I quaffed the fatal beverage. Another year shall not elapse before, encountering gigantic dangers, warring with the powers of frost in their home, beset by famine, toil, and tempest, I yield this body, too tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom, to the destructive elements of air and water. Or, if I survive, my name shall be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men, and my task achieved, I shall adopt more resolute means, and, by scattering and annihilating the atoms that compose my frame, set at liberty the life imprisoned within, and so cruelly prevented from soaring from this dim earth to a sphere more congenial to its immortal essence. The end. Cheery. But, another Mary Shelley who seemed to have some kind of theme in her writing, perhaps about, I don't know, the folly of science that wished to meddle with the natural order of things. But I appreciate that he himself wasn't seeking to live forever. It's not like, oh good grief, what have I done to myself? It's, this potion's about to go off, someone should drink it. Professor's asleep, I'm gonna have it. Oh, it does what? Oh dear. That's, yeah. He's punished by someone else's hubris, basically. Right. Do we want to go on to another story, or was that so long? How long is Tachypomp's a few pages? I don't know. How do you want to do this? Definitely gives you pause about wishing to live forever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't have another one that I was going to do that is short. Could take an early break. Yeah, I might take an early break and decide, possibly coming back with Lucy reading me something, or I might fit something in. I don't know. We shall see. But yes, we're going to take a quick break. So you know the drill, and also thank you for being here, for listening. Yeah, you have 5 minutes to move around, stretch, refill water, cycle fluids, and any other stroke a cat if you got one. And we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Bye for now. hello, it's me again. We've decided between us that because Lucy's reading tomorrow, and frankly, oh no worries, Erin. Get back, and I'm out. Goodbye. Oh, okay, goodbye. No, have fun cleaning. I hope it goes well. Yeah, we decided between us that because Lucy's reading stuff tomorrow, and frankly, because she, as we like divided tasks up this week, she seems to have like more to do this week than me. So you're stuck with me. She's here. Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
Hello.
There you go. I'm not just making it up. She's real.
I exist.
Yeah. Yeah, she's totally real. She just goes to another school in Canada, and so instead you've got me for the second half of this stream. Everybody say hooray, or else. But also, I forgot to thank Parola before the break. Thank you very much for the 15 months. Much appreciated. Lovely to see you. I hope you're well. And yes, Tupin Raven, you were saying, has Frankenstein been read? Oh, there you go. Lucy's got there in chat, as well as other people. Yes, that is on the YouTube, on the archive. It is back there somewhere. There should be a playlist for the whole thing. If I do that, that should hopefully give you a link. Wow, I could probably neaten up that link actually. But yeah, there's Frankenstein. Was it like the first?
I think it might be.
Yeah, I think it might have been like the first full-length novel that Lucy did, while we were still kind of settling into a rhythm on this, and figuring out what we were both going to do. No worries. Yeah, I figured you would have the link. I mean, it's also in the information below the stream and whatnot, but you know, that's what we do. Yeah, so that'll go back a bit. Which again, I suppose it's difficult because it's like in the spirit of this, like rereading things, and to me, I feel at times perhaps doing a slightly sort of neater, cleaner job on the reread. Certainly for me, because my audio equipment has changed a lot since we started and is a lot less roomy and noisy, I would say. But I feel like in myself I've improved at this task of reading, and I'm better at it now than I used to be. And so it's like, oh well, we'll redo some short stories like this. Exactly, we've got more experience. We'll do some short stories like this, but then the longer ones, it's kind of quite a big ask to go back and reread a novel on stream. But yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, it'd be nice to find some way maybe to like redo those in some form and give like a slightly cleaner recording. Reading loud definitely takes practice. It does, as again certainly I've learned. I'm not going to speak for Lucy, I don't know. She's in the room, she can do that herself if she wants, but could put them on Patreon. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, it would take a lot longer to make, to re-record and for you to edit, but that's an option. We could try and think about doing something like that, because yeah, they would need to be re-recorded rather than like editing the originals or anything. So yeah, it's an option. Yeah, maybe set it as like some kind of Patreon goal or something. But speaking of things that are here and now instead, I guess if I crack on, we might be able to get a couple done. So this next one. Oh, actually, I need to find a text for you, don't I? That's what I need to do. I will do that quickly. I have read a couple of times now. I think this one is on. This one's on a collection somewhere that we did on what would now be on Patreon. It also went up on the Bandcamp previously. Is a fun story. You're on phone, so difficult. Wait, what on phone?
Link.
Oh, right. No, that's fine. This is a fun story that is called The Tachypomp. by Edward Page Mitchell. That's apparently his most famous story. Oh right. But yeah, I've done it on stream. I've done it on the Bandcamp, now Patreon. And I'm going to do it again now here because it's fun. So if everyone is ready and is ready to click and read along, if you want to do so, or just listening while you're cleaning, or perhaps petting a cat, maybe playing a video game, who could say? It's a Sunday afternoon for some of us. Let's have a story. This is The Tachypomp by Edward Page Mitchell. A mathematical demonstration. There was nothing mysterious about Professor Surd's dislike for me. I was the only poor mathematician in an exceptionally mathematical class. The old gentleman sought the lecture room every morning with eagerness, and left it reluctantly. For was it not a thing of joy to find 70 young men who individually and collectively preferred X to XX, who had rather differentiate than dissipate, and for whom the limbs of the heavenly bodies had more attractions than those of earthly stars upon the spectacular stage? So affairs went swimmingly between the professor of mathematics and the junior class at Polyp University. In every man of the 70, the sage saw the logarithm of a possible Laplace, of a Sturm, or of a Newton. It was a delightful task for him to lead them through the pleasant valleys of conic sections, and beside the still waters of the integral calculus. Figuratively speaking, his problem was not a hard one. He had only to manipulate and eliminate, and to raise to a higher power, and the triumphant result of examination day was assured. But I was a disturbing element, a perplexing, unknown quantity which had somehow crept into the work, and which seriously threatened to impair the accuracy of his calculations. It was a touching sight to behold the venerable mathematician as he pleaded with me not so utterly to disregard precedent in the use of cotangents, or as he urged, with eyes almost tearful, that ordinates were dangerous things to trifle with. All in vain. More theorems went onto my cuff than into my head. Never did chalk do so much work to so little purpose. And therefore it came that Furnace Second was reduced to a zero in Professor Surd's imagination. He looked upon me with all the horror which an unalgebraic nature could inspire. I have seen the professor walk around an entire square rather than meet the man who had no mathematics in his soul. For Furnace Second were no invitations to Professor Surd's house. 70 of the class supped in delegations around the periphery of the professor's tea table. The 71st knew nothing of the charms of that perfect ellipse, with its twin bunches of fuchsias and geraniums in gorgeous precision at the two foci. This, unfortunately enough, was no trifling deprivation. Not that I longed especially for segments of Mrs. Surd's justly celebrated lemon pies, not that the spheroidal damsons of her excellent preserving had any marked allurements, not even that I yearned to hear the professor's jocose table talk about binomials and chatty illustrations of abstruse paradoxes. The explanation is far different. Professor Surd had a daughter. 20 years before, he made a proposition of marriage to the present Mrs. S. He added a little corollary to his proposition not long after. The corollary was a girl. Abscissa Surd was as perfectly symmetrical as Giotto's circle, and as pure withal as the mathematics her father taught. It was just when spring was coming to extract the roots of frozen-up vegetation that I fell in love with the corollary. That she herself was not indifferent I soon had reason to regard as a self-evident truth. The sagacious reader will already recognize nearly all the elements necessary to a well-ordered plot. We have introduced a heroine, inferred a hero, and constructed a hostile parent after the most approved model. A movement for the story, a deus ex machina, is alone lacking. With considerable satisfaction, I can promise a perfect novelty in this line, a deus ex machina never before offered to the public. It would be discounting ordinary intelligence to say that I sought with unwearying assiduity to figure my way into the stern father's goodwill. That never did dullard apply himself to mathematics more patiently than I. That never did faithfulness achieve such meagre reward. Then I engaged a private tutor. His instructions met with no better success. My tutor's name was Jean-Marie Rivarol. He was a unique Alsatian, though Gallic in name, thoroughly Teuton in nature. By birth a Frenchman, by education a German. His age was 30, his profession omniscience, the wolf at his door poverty, the skeleton in his closet a consuming but unrequited passion. The most recondite principles of practical science were his toys, the deepest intricacies of abstract science his diversions. Problems which were foreordained mysteries to me were to him as clear as Tahoe water. Perhaps this very fact would explain our lack of success in the relation of tutor and pupil. Perhaps the failure is alone due to my own unmitigated stupidity. Rivarol had hung about the skirts of the university for several years, supplying his few wants by writing for scientific journals, or by giving assistance to students who, like myself, were characterized by a plethora of purse and a paucity of ideas. Cooking, studying, and sleeping in his attic lodgings, and prosecuting queer experiments, all by himself. We were not long discovering that even this eccentric genius could not transplant brains into my deficient skull. I gave over the struggle in despair. An unhappy year dragged its slow length around. A gloomy year it was, brightened only by occasional interviews with Abscissa, the abbey of my thoughts and dreams. Commencement day was coming on apace. I was soon to go forth with the rest of my class to astonish and delight a waiting world. The professor seemed to avoid me more than ever. Nothing but conventionalities, I think, kept him from shaping his treatment of me on the basis of unconcealed disgust. At last, in the very recklessness of despair, I resolved to see him, plead with him, threaten him if need be, and risk all my fortunes on one desperate chance. I wrote him a somewhat defiant letter stating my aspirations and, as I flattered myself, shrewdly giving him a week to get over the first shock of horrid surprise. Then I was to call and learn my fate. During the week of suspense, I nearly worried myself into a fever. I was first crazy hope, and then saner despair. It was first crazy hope, and then saner despair. On Friday evening, when I presented myself at the professor's door, I was such a haggard, sleepy, dragged-out spectre that even Miss Jocasta, the harsh-favoured maiden sister of the Surds, admitted me with commiserate regard and suggested pennyroyal tea. Professor Surd was at a faculty meeting. Would I wait? Yes, till all was blue if need be. Miss Abbey? Abscissa had gone to Wilborough to visit a school friend. The aged maiden hoped I would make myself comfortable, and departed to the unknown haunts which knew Jocasta's daily walk. Comfortable! But I settled myself in a great uneasy chair and waited, with the contradictory spirit common to such junctures, dreading every step lest it should herald the man whom, of all men, I wished to see. I had been there at least an hour, and was growing right drowsy. At length Professor Surd came in. He sat down in the dusk opposite me, and I thought his eyes glinted with malignant pleasure as he said abruptly, "So, young man, you think you are a fit husband for my girl?" I stammered some inanity about making up in affection what I lacked in merit, about my expectations, family, and the like. He quickly interrupted me. "You misapprehend me, sir. Your nature is destitute of those mathematical perceptions and acquirements which are the only sure foundations of character. You have no mathematics in you. You are fit for treason, stratagems, and spoils. Shakespeare. Your narrow intellect cannot understand and appreciate a generous mind. There is all the difference between you and a surd, if I may say it, which intervenes between an infinitesimal and an infinite. Why, I will even venture to say that you do not comprehend the problem of the couriers. I admitted that the problem of the couriers should be classed rather without my list of accomplishments than within it. I regretted this fault very deeply and suggested amendment. I faintly hoped that my fortune would be such— "Money!" he impatiently exclaimed. "Why do you seek to bribe a Roman senator with a penny whistle? Why, boy, do you parade your paltry wealth, which, expressed in mills, will not cover 10 decimal places, before the eyes of a man who measures the planets in their orbits, and close crowds infinity itself?" I hastily disclaimed any intention of obtruding my foolish dollars, and he went on, "Your letter surprised me not a little. I thought you would be the last person in the world to presume to an alliance here, but having a regard for you personally," and again I saw malice twinkle in his small eyes, "and still more regard for Absissa's happiness, I have decided that you shall have her, upon conditions." "Upon conditions," he repeated with a half-smothered sneer. "What are they?" cried I, eagerly enough. "Only name them." "Well, sir," he continued, and the deliberation of his speech seemed the very refinement of cruelty, "you have only to prove yourself worthy of an alliance with a mathematical family. You have only to accomplish a task which I shall presently give you. Your eyes ask me what it is. I will tell you. Distinguish yourself in that noble branch of abstract science in which, you cannot but acknowledge, you are at present sadly deficient. I will place Absissa's hand in yours whenever you shall come before me and square the circle to my satisfaction. No, that is too easy a condition. I should cheat myself. Say perpetual motion. How do you like that? Do you think it lies within the range of your mental capabilities? You don't smile. Perhaps your talents don't run in the way of perpetual motion. Several people have found that theirs didn't. I'll give you another chance. We were speaking of the problem of the couriers, and I think you expressed a desire to know more of that ingenious question. You shall have the opportunity. Sit down some day when you have nothing else to do and discover the principle of infinite speed. I mean the law of motion, which shall accomplish an infinitely great distance in an infinitely short time. You may mix in a little practical mechanics if you choose. Invent some method of taking the tardy courier over his road at the rate of 60 miles a minute. Demonstrate me this discovery when you have made it, mathematically, and approximate it practically, and Absissa is yours. Until you can, I will thank you to trouble neither myself nor her. I could stand his mockings no longer. I stumbled mechanically out of the room and out of the house. I even forgot my hat and gloves. For an hour I walked in the moonlight. Gradually I succeeded to a more hopeful frame of mind. This was due to my ignorance of mathematics. Had I understood the real meaning of what he asked, I should have been utterly despondent. Perhaps this problem of 60 miles a minute was not so impossible after all. At any rate, I could attempt, though I might not succeed. And Rivarol came to mind. I would ask him. I would enlist his knowledge to accompany my own devoted perseverance. I sought his lodgings at once. The man of science lived in the 4th story back. I had never been in his room before. When I entered, he was in the act of filling a beer mug from a carboy labelled Aquafortis. "Seat you," he said. "No, not in that chair. That is my petty cash adjuster." But he was a second too late. I had carelessly thrown myself into a chair of seductive appearance. To my utter amazement, it reached out 2 skeleton arms and clutched me with a grasp against which I struggled in vain. Then a skull stretched itself over my shoulder and grinned with ghastly familiarity close to my face. Riverol came to my aid with many apologies. He touched a spring somewhere and the petty cash adjuster relaxed its horrid hold. I placed myself, gingerly, in a plain cane-bottomed rocking chair, which, Riverol assured me, was a safe location. "That seat," he said, "is an arrangement upon which I must felicitate myself. I made it at Heidelberg. It has saved me a vast deal of small annoyance. I consign to its embraces the friends who bore and the visitors who exasperate me. But it is never so useful as when terrifying some tradesman with an insignificant account. Hence the pet name which I have facetiously given it. They are invariably too glad to purchase release at the price of a bill receipted. Do you well apprehend the idea?" While the Alsatian diluted his glass of aquafortis, shook into it an infusion of bitters, and tossed off the bumper with an apparent relish, I had time to look around the strange apartment. The four corners of the room were occupied respectively by the turning lathe, a Ruhmkorff coil, a small steam engine, and an orrery in stately motion. Tables, shelves, chairs and floor supported an odd aggregation of tools, retorts, chemicals, gas receivers, philosophical instruments, boots, flasks, paper collar boxes, books diminutive and books of preposterous size. There were plaster busts of Aristotle, Archimedes, and Comte, while a great drowsy owl was blinking away, perched on the benign brow of Martin Farquhar Tupper. "He always roosts there when he proposes to slumber," explained my tutor. "You are a bird of no ordinary mind. Schlafen Sie wohl." Through a closet door half open, I could see a human-like form covered with a sheet. Rivarol caught my glance. "That," said he, "will be my masterpiece. It is a microcosm, an android, and yet only partially complete. And why not? Albertus Magnus constructed an image perfect to talk metaphysics and confute the schools. So did Sylvester II. So did Robertus Greathead. Roger Bacon made a brazen head that held discourses, but the first named of these came to destruction. Thomas Aquinas got wrathful at some of its syllogisms and smashed its head. The idea is reasonable enough. Mental action will yet be reduced to laws as definite as those which govern the physical. Why should not I accomplish a mannequin which shall preach as original discourses as the Reverend Dr. Olchin, or talk poetry as mechanically as Paul Anapest? My android can already work problems in vulgar fractions and compose sonnets. I hope to teach it the positive philosophy. Out of the bewildering confusion of his effects, Rivarol produced 2 pipes and filled them. He handed one to me. "And here," he said, "I live and am tolerably comfortable. When my coat wears out at the elbows, I seek the tailor and am measured for another. When I am hungry, I promenade myself to the butcher's and bring home a pound or so of steak, which I cook very nicely in 3 seconds by this oxyhydrogen flame. Thirsty, perhaps I send for a carboy of aquafortis. But I have it charged, all charged. My spirit is above any small pecuniary transaction. I loathe your dirty greenbacks and never handle what they call scrip." "But are you never pestered with bills?" I asked. "Don't any creditors worry your life out?" "Creditors?" gasped Rivarol. "I have learned no such word in your very admirable language. He who will allow his soul to be vexed by creditors is a relic of an imperfect civilization. Of what use is science if it cannot avail a man who has accounts current? Listen. The moment you or anyone else enters the outside door, this little electric bell sounds me warning. Every successive step on Mrs. Grimler's staircase is a spy and informer vigilant for my benefit. The first step is trod upon. That trusty first step immediately telegraphs your weight. Nothing could be simpler. It is exactly like any platform scale. The weight is registered up here upon this dial. The second step records the size of my visitor's feet, the third his height, the fourth his complexion, and so on. By the time he reaches the top of the first flight, I have a pretty accurate description of him right here at my elbow, and quite a margin of time for deliberation and action. Do you follow me? It is plain enough. Only the ABC of my science. I see all that, I said, but I don't see how it helps you any. The knowledge that a creditor is coming won't pay his bill. You can't escape unless you jump out of the window. Riverall laughed softly. I will tell you. You shall see what becomes of any poor devil who goes to demand money of me, a man of science. It pleases me. I was 7 weeks perfecting my dun suppressor. Did you know, he whispered exultingly, did you know that there is a hole through the Earth's centre? Physicists have long suspected it. I was the first to find it. You have read how Huygens, the Dutch navigator, discovered in Kerguelen's Land an abysmal pit which 1,400 fathoms of plumb line failed to sound. Herr Tom, that hole has no bottom. It runs from one surface of the earth to the antipodal surface. It is diametric. But where is the antipodal spot? You stand upon it. I learned this by the merest chance. I was deep digging in Mrs. Grimler's cellar to bury a poor cat I had sacrificed in a galvanic experiment when the earth under my spade crumbled, caved in, and, wonder-stricken, I stood upon the brink of a yawning shaft. I dropped a coal hod in. It went down, 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 bounding and rebounding. In 2 hours and a quarter the coal hod came up again. I caught it and restored it to the angry Grimler. Just think a minute. The coal hod went down faster and faster till it reached the centre of the earth. There it would stop were it not for acquired momentum. Beyond the centre of its journey was relatively upward, toward the opposite surface of the globe. So, losing velocity, it went slower and slower till it reached that surface. Here it came to rest for a second, and then fell back again, 8,000 odd miles, into my hands. Had I not interfered with it, it would have repeated its journey time after time, each trip of shorter extent, like the diminishing oscillations of a pendulum, till it finally came to eternal rest at the centre of the sphere. I am not slow to give practical application to any such grand discovery. My dun suppressor was born of it. A trap just outside my chamber door, a spring in here, a creditor on the trap. Need I say more? But isn't it a trifle inhuman, I mildly suggested, plunging an unhappy being into a perpetual journey to and fro from Kerguelen's Land, without a moment's warning? I give them a chance. When they come up the first time, I wait at the mouth of the shaft with a rope in hand. If they are reasonable, they will come to terms. If they are reasonable and will come to terms, I fling them the line. If they perish, 'tis their own fault. Only, he added with a melancholy smile, the centre is getting so plugged up with creditors that I'm afraid there soon will be no choice whatever for 'em. By this time, I had conceived a high opinion of my tutor's ability. If anybody could send me waltzing through space at an infinite speed, Riverall could do it. I filled my pipe and told him the story. He heard with grave and patient attention. Then, for full half an hour, he whiffed away in silence. Finally, he spoke. The ancient cipher has overreached himself. He has given you a choice of 2 problems, both of which he deems insoluble. Neither of them is insoluble. The only gleam of intelligence old cotangent showed was when he said that squaring the circle was too easy. He was right. It would have given you your Liebchen in 5 minutes. I squared the circle before I discarded pantalettes. I will show you the work. But it would be a digression, and you are in no mood for digressions. Our first chance, therefore, lies in perpetual motion. Now, my good friend, I will frankly tell you that, although I have compassed this interesting problem, I do not choose to use it on your behalf. I, too, Herr Tom, have a heart. The loveliest of her sex frowns upon me. her somewhat mature charms are not for Jean-Marie Rivarol. She has cruelly said that her years demand of me filial rather than connubial regard. Is love a matter of years or of eternity? This question did I put to the cold yet lovely Jocasta. "Jocasta Sird," I remarked in surprise. "Abscissa's aunt?" "The same," he said sadly. "I will not attempt to conceal that upon my maiden Jocasta my maiden heart has been bestowed. Give me your hand, my nephew, in affliction as in affection." Rivarol dashed away a not discreditable tear and resumed, "My only hope lies in this discovery of perpetual motion. It will give me the fame, the wealth. Can Jocasta refuse these? If she can, there is only the trapdoor and Kerguelen's land." I bashfully asked to see the perpetual motion machine. My uncle in affliction shook his head. "At another time," he said. "Suffice it at present to say that it is something upon the principle of a woman's tongue. But you see now why we must turn to your case, so it must turn in your case to the alternative condition, infinite speed. There are several ways in which this may be accomplished theoretically. By the lever, for instance. Imagine a lever with a very long and very short arm. Apply power to the shorter arm, which will move it with great velocity. The end of the long arm will move much faster. Now, keep shortening the short arm and lengthening the long one, and, as you approach infinity in their difference of length, you approach infinity in the speed of the long arm. It would be difficult to demonstrate this practically to the professor. We must seek another solution. Jean-Marie will meditate. Come to me in a fortnight. Good night. But stop, you have the money? Das Geld? Much more than I need. Good, let us strike hands. Gold and knowledge, science and love. What may not such a partnership achieve? We go to conquer thee, Abscissa. Vorwärts. When, at the end of a fortnight, I sought Rivarol's chamber, I passed with some little trepidation over the terminus of the airline to Kerguelen's land, and evaded the extended arms of the petty cash adjuster. Rivarol drew a mug of ale for me, and filled himself a retort of his own peculiar beverage. "Come," he said at length, "let us drink success to the Tachypomp." The Tachypomp? Yes, why not? Tachy, quickly, and pepompa, to send. May it send you quickly to your wedding day. Abscissa is yours. It is done. When shall we start for the prairies? Where is it? I asked, looking in vain around the room for any contrivance which might seem calculated to advance matrimonial prospects. It is here, and he gave his forehead a significant tap. Then he held forth didactically. There is force enough in existence to yield us a speed of 60 miles a minute, or even more. All we need is the knowledge how to combine and apply it. The wise man will not attempt to make some great force yield some great speed. He will keep adding the little force to the little force, making each little force yield its little speed, until an aggregate of little forces shall be a great force, yielding an aggregate of little speeds, a great speed. The difficulty is not in aggregating the forces, it lies in the corresponding aggregation of the speeds. One musket ball will go, say, a mile. It is not hard to increase the force of muskets to 1,000, yet the 1,000 musket balls will go no farther and no faster than the one. You see, then, where our trouble lies. We cannot readily add speed to speed as we add force to force. My discovery is simply the utilization of a principle which extorts an increment of speed from each increment of power. But this is the metaphysics of physics. Let us be practical, or nothing. When you have walked forward on a moving train from the rear car towards the engine, did you ever think what you were really doing? Why, yes, I have generally been going to the smoking car to have a cigar. Tut, not that. I mean, did it ever occur to you on such an occasion that absolutely you were moving faster than the train? The train passes the telegraph poles at a rate of 30 miles an hour, say. You walk towards the smoking car at the rate of 4 miles an hour. Then you pass the telegraph poles at the rate of 34 miles. Your absolute speed is the speed of the engine plus the speed of your own locomotion. Do you follow me? I began to get an inkling of his meaning and told him so. Very well, let us advance a step. Your addition to the speed of the engine is trivial, and the space in which you can exercise it limited. Now suppose two stations, A and B, 2 miles distant by the track. Imagine a train of platform cars, the last car resting at station A. The train is a mile long, say. The engine is therefore within a mile of station B. Say the train can move a mile in 10 minutes. The last car, having 2 miles to go, would reach B in 20 minutes, but the engine, a mile ahead, would get there in 10. You jump on the last car at A in a prodigious hurry to reach Abscissa, who is at B. If you stay on the last car, it will be 20 long minutes before you see her. But the engine reaches B and the fair lady in 10. You will be a stupid reasoner and an indifferent lover if you don't put for the engine over those platform cars as fast as your legs will carry you. You can run a mile, the length of the train, in 10 minutes. Therefore, you reach Abscissa when the engine does, or in 10 minutes. 10 minutes sooner than if you had lazily sat down upon the rear car and talked politics with the brakeman. You have diminished the time by 1/2. You have added your speed to that of the locomotive to some purpose. Nicht wahr? I saw it perfectly, much plainer perhaps for his putting in the clause about Abscissa. He continued. This illustration, though a slow one, leads up to a principle which may be carried to any extent. Our first anxiety will be to spare your legs and wind. Let us suppose that the 2 miles of track are perfectly straight, and make our train one platform car, a mile long, with parallel rails laid upon its top. Put a little dummy engine on these rails and let it run to and fro along the platform car, while the platform car is pulled along the ground track. Catch the idea? The dummy takes your place, but it can run its mile much faster. Fancy that our locomotive is strong enough to pull the platform car over the 2 miles in 2 minutes. The dummy can attain the same speed. When the engine reaches B in 1 minute, the dummy, having gone a mile atop the platform car, reaches B also. We have so combined the speeds of those 2 engines as to accomplish 2 miles in 1 minute. Is this all we can do? Prepare to exercise your imagination. I lit my pipe. Still 2 miles of straight track between A and B. On the track, a long platform car reaching from A to within 1/4 of a mile of B. We will now discard ordinary locomotives and adopt as our motive power a series of compact magnetic engines distributed underneath the platform car, all along its length. I don't understand those magnetic engines. Well, each of them consists of a great iron horseshoe rendered alternately a magnet and not a magnet by an intermittent current of electricity from a battery. This current, in its turn, regulated by clockwork. When the horseshoe is in the circuit, it is a magnet, and it pulls its clapper toward it with enormous power. When it is out of the circuit the next second, it is not a magnet, and it lets the clapper go. The clapper, oscillating to and fro, imparts a rotary motion to a flywheel which transmits it to the drivers on the rails. Such are our motors. They are no novelty, for trial has proved them predictable. With a magnetic engine for every truck of wheels, we can reasonably expect to move our immense car and to drive it along at a speed, say, 1 mile a minute. 1 second. Oh no, I don't need you. I sort of did. The forward end, having but a quarter of a mile to go, will reach B in 15 seconds. We will call this platform car number 1. On top of number 1 are laid rails on which another platform car, number 2, is a quarter of a mile shorter than number 1, is moved in precisely the same way. Number 2, in its turn, is surmounted by number 3, moving independently of the tiers beneath, and a quarter of a mile shorter than number 2. Number 2 is 1.5 miles long, number 3 1.25 miles. Above, on successive levels, are number 4, 1 mile long, number 5, 3/4 mile, number 6, 1/2 mile, number 7, 1/4 mile, and number 8, a short passenger car on top of all. Each car moves upon the car beneath it independently of all the others. Yeah, sleep's catching up with me now. Each car has its own magnetic engines. Well, the train being drawn up with the latter end of each car resting against a lofty bumping post at A, Tom Furness, the gentlemanly conductor, and Jean-Marie Rivarol, engineer, mount by a long ladder to the exalted number 8. The complicated mechanism is set in motion. What happens? Number 8 runs a quarter of a mile in 15 seconds and reaches the end of number 7. Meanwhile, number 7 has run a quarter of a mile in the same time and reached the end of number 6. Number 6, a quarter of a mile in 15 seconds and reached the end of number 5. Number 5, the end of number 4, number 4 of number 3, number 3 of number 2, number 2 of number 1. And number 1, in 15 seconds, has gone its quarter of a mile along the ground track and has reached Station B. All of this has been done in 15 seconds. Wherefore numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 come to rest against the bumping post at B at precisely the same second. We in number 8 reach B just when number 1 reaches it. In other words, we accomplish 2 miles in 15 seconds. Each of the 8 cars moving at the rate of a mile a minute has contributed a quarter of a mile to our journey and has done its work in 15 seconds. All the 8 did their work at once during the same 15 seconds. Consequently, we have been whizzed through the air at the somewhat startling speed of 7.5 seconds to the mile. This is the Tachypomp. Does it justify the name? Although a little bewildered by the complexity of cars, I apprehended the general principle of the machine. I made a diagram and understood it much better. You have merely improved on the idea of my moving faster than the train when I was going to the smoking car. Precisely. So far, we have kept within the bounds of the practicable. To satisfy the professor, you can theorize in something after this fashion. If we double the number of cars, thus decreasing by 1/2 the distance which each has to go, we shall attain twice the speed. Each of the 16 cars will have but 1/8 of a mile to go. At the uniform rate we have adopted, the 2 miles can be done in 7.5 instead of 15 seconds. With 32 cars and a 1/16 of a mile or 20 rods difference in their length, we arrive at the speed of a mile in less than 2 seconds, with 64 cars, each travelling but 10 rods, a mile under the second. More than 60 miles a minute! If this isn't rapid enough for the professor, tell him to go on, increasing the number of his cars and diminishing the distance each one has to run. If 64 cars yield a speed of a mile inside the second, let him fancy a tachypomp of 640 cars and amuse himself calculating the rate of car number 640. Just whisper to him that when he has an infinite number of cars with an infinitesimal difference in their lengths, he will have obtained that infinite speed for which he seems to yearn. Then demand abscissa. I wrung my friend's hand in silent and grateful admiration. I could say nothing. You have listened to the man of theory, he said proudly. You shall now behold the practical engineer. We will go to the west of the Mississippi and find some suitably level locality. We will erect thereon a model tachypomp. We will summon thereunto the professor, his daughter, and why not his fair sister Jocasta as well. We will take them on a journey which shall much astonish the venerable Surd. He shall place Abscissa's digits in yours, and bless you both with an algebraic formula. Jocasta shall contemplate with wonder the genius of Rivarol. But we have much to do. We must ship to St. Joseph the vast amount of material to be employed in the construction of the Tachypomp. We must engage a small army of workmen to effect that construction, for we are to annihilate time and space. Perhaps you had better see your bankers. I rushed impetuously to the door. There should be no delay. Stop! Stop! God's villain, stop! Shrieked Rivarol. I launched my butcher this morning, and I haven't bolted the... But it was too late. I was upon the trap. It swung open with a crash, and I was plunged down, down, down. I felt as if I were falling through illimitable space. I remember wondering, as I rushed through the darkness, whether I should reach Kerguelen's land or stop at the centre. It seemed an eternity. Then my course was suddenly and painfully arrested. I opened my eyes. Around me were the walls of Professor Surd's study. Under me was a hard, unyielding plain which I knew too well was Professor Surd's study floor. Behind me was the black, slippery haircloth chair which had belched me forth, much as the whale served Jonah. In front of me stood Professor Surd himself, looking down with a not unpleasant smile. "Good evening, Mr. Furness. Let me help you up. You look tired, sir. No wonder you fell asleep when I kept you so long waiting. Shall I get you a glass of wine? No? By the way, since receiving your letter, I find that you are a son of my old friend, Judge Furness. I have made inquiries and see no reason why you should not make Absissa a good husband. Still, I can see no reason why the Tachypomp should not have succeeded. Can you? The end. Thank you for listening. Now, do I have time to read you something bleak? Who wants a cheery story after that one? Do we want one more? Yeah, let's do one more. Excuse me, just having some water. Yeah, go on. What? It says the heckler from behind. Right. Then yes, that was the Tachypomp. I'm quickly going to find this last one then, which is not there. Right. That's... Oh, is this looking illustrated? Oh, sick. Hell yeah. Okay. Well, I say it has an illustration, so for those of you that don't like words, and what are you doing here if so? Was Absissa Surd on purpose? It must have been. Probably yes, actually. That is the second name pun that I have not picked up on today. Great. What was the first one? Oh, it was from a book, another book that I was looking up that might be a fun one to read. What was it? Something like someone from like the Diary of a Complete Nobody, I think it was called. And like his basically some sort of upper class twit of the year who is just documenting all the pointless minutiae of his life in a satire on that class of people, and two of his friends referred to as Mr. Cummings and Mr. Gowing, I think, which I completely just failed to notice that it's coming and going. Yeah, I guess this is just how tired I am today. That's going to be my excuse. Yeah, I'm even slurring some words. Great. Anyway, there is your link in chat. It is the star. And so without any further ado, this is a shorter one than the last two. It's not the cheeriest story. There's a couple of words and old-timey names for people that I have replaced. I'm just checking because I remember there's a couple of bits, but no. Where was the other? now. Come on, H.G. Wells. I know it's in here because I remember reading it. Okay, that's the way. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is fine. Right. It is. This is H.G. Wells. This is a lesser known, I think, H.G. Wells one, because obviously he's done a number of famous stories. Like we've read The Time Machine and War of the Worlds on here. I really enjoyed War of the Worlds. I thought that was very good. That's why I started saying how much I enjoyed actually going back and reading the stories that I know because I've seen them as films and TV and stuff, and actually going and reading the original sources is a fun and interesting one. But yeah, this is another H.G. Wells. It is not the inexperienced ghost. Perhaps we can just coax Lucy to read that again sometime, maybe. I don't know. You know, we can revisit stories another time as well. It doesn't just have to be during book week. But for now, on this particular revisitation, I'm going to begin. So we shall read The Star by H.G. Wells. It was on the first day of the new year that the announcement was made, almost simultaneously from 3 observatories, that the motion of the planet Neptune, the outermost of all the planets that wheel about the sun, had become very erratic. Ogilvy had already called attention to a suspected retardation in its velocity in December. Such a piece of news was scarcely calculated to interest a world the greater portion of whose inhabitants were unaware of the existence of the planet Neptune, nor outside the astronomical profession did the subsequent discovery of a faint remote speck of light in the region of the perturbed planet cause any very great excitement. Scientific people, however, found the intelligence remarkable enough, even before it became known that the new body was rapidly growing larger and brighter, that its motion was quite different from the orderly progress of the planets, and that the deflection of Neptune and its satellite was becoming now of an unprecedented kind. Few people without a training in science can realize the huge isolation of the solar system. The sun, with its specks of planets, its dust of planetoids, and its impalpable comets, swims in a vacant immensity that almost defeats the imagination. Beyond the orbit of Neptune there is space, vacant so far as human observation has penetrated, without warmth or light or sound, blank emptiness for 20 million times a million miles. That is the smallest estimate of the distance to be traversed before the very nearest of the stars is attained, and, saving a few comets more unsubstantial than the thinnest flame, no matter had ever to human knowledge crossed this gulf of space, until early in the 20th century this strange wanderer appeared. A vast mass of matter it was, bulky, heavy, rushing without warning out of the black mystery of the sky into the radiance of the sun. By the second day it was clearly visible to any decent instrument as a speck with a barely sensible diameter in the constellation Leo near Regulus. In a little while an opera glass could attain it. On the third day of the new year, the newspaper readers of 2 hemispheres were made aware for the first time of the real importance of this unusual apparition in the heavens. A planetary collision, one London paper headed the news, and proclaimed Duchesne's opinion that this strange new planet would probably collide with Neptune. The leader writers enlarged upon the topic, so that in most of the capitals of the world, on January 3rd, there was an expectation, however vague, of some imminent phenomenon in the night sky. And as the night followed the sunset round the globe, thousands of men turned their eyes skyward to see the old familiar stars, just as they had always been. Until it was dawn in London, and Pollux setting the star and the stars overhead grown pale. The winter's dawn it was, a sickly filtering accumulation of daylight, and the light of gas and the candles shone yellow in the windows to show where people were astir. But the yawning policeman saw the thing. The busy crowds in the markets stopped agape. workmen going to their work betimes, milkmen, the drivers of new carts, dissipation going home jaded and pale, homeless wanderers, sentinels on their beats, and in the country, labourers trudging afield, poachers slinking home, all over the dusky, quickening country it could be seen, and out at sea by seamen watching for the day, a great white star come suddenly into the westward sky. Brighter it was than any star in our skies, brighter than the evening star at its brightest. It still glowed out white and large, no mere twinkling spot of light, but a small, round, clear, shining disk, an hour after the day had come. And where science has not reached, men stared and feared, telling one another of the wars and pestilences that were foreshadowed by these fiery signs in the heavens. South Africans, Ghanaians, Frenchmen, Spaniards, Portuguese stood in the warmth of the sunrise watching the setting of this strange new star. And in 100 observatories there had been suppressed excitement, rising almost to shouting pitch, as the two remote bodies had rushed together, and a hurrying to and fro to gather photographic apparatus and spectroscope, and the appliance and this appliance and that, to record this novel astonishing sight, the destruction of a world. For it was a world, a sister planet to our Earth, far greater than our Earth indeed, that had so suddenly flashed into flaming death. Neptune it was had been struck fairly and squarely by the strange planet from the outer space, and the heat of the concussion had incontinently turned two solid globes into one vast mass of incandescence. Round the world that day, 2 hours before the dawn, went the pallid great white star, fading only as it sank westward and the sun mounted above it. Everywhere men marvelled at it, but of all those who saw it none could have marvelled more than those sailors, habitual watchers of the stars, who far away at sea had heard nothing of its advent, and saw it now rise like a pygmy moon and climb zenithward, and hang overhead and sink westward with the passing of the night. And when next it rose over Europe, everywhere were crowds of watchers on hilly slopes, on house roofs, in open spaces, staring eastward for the rising of the great new star. It rose with a white glow in front of it, like the glare of a white fire, and those who had seen it come into existence the night before cried out at the sight of it. "It is larger," they cried. "It is brighter." And indeed, the moon, a quarter full and sinking in the west, was in its apparent size beyond comparison, but scarcely in all its breadth had it as much brightness now as the little circle of the strange new star. "It is brighter!" cried the people clustering in the streets, but in the dim observatories the watchers held their breath and peered at one another. "It is near," they said. Excuse me. "Nearer." And voice after voice repeated, "It is nearer," and the clicking telegraph took that up, and it trembled along telephone wires, and in 1,000 cities grimy compositors fingered the type. "It is nearer." Men writing in offices, struck with a strange realization, flung down their pens. Men talking in 1,000 places suddenly came upon a grotesque possibility in those words, "It is nearer." It hurried along wakening streets. It was shouted down the frost-stilled ways of quiet villages. Men who had read these things from the throbbing tapes stood in yellow-lit doorways shouting the news to the passers-by. "It is nearer." Pretty women, flushed and glittering, heard the news told jestingly between dances, and feigned an intelligent interest they did not feel. Nearer, indeed! How curious! How very, very clever people must be to find out things like that. Lonely tramps faring through the wintry night murmured those words to comfort themselves, looking skyward. "It has need to be nearer, for the night's as cold as charity. Don't see much warmth from it if it is nearer all the same." "What is a new star to me?" cried the weeping woman kneeling beside her dead. The schoolboy, rising early for his examination work, puzzled it out for himself, with the great white star shining broad and bright through the frost flowers of his window. Centrifugal, centripetal, he said, with his chin on his fist. Stop a planet in its flight, rob it of its centrifugal force, what then? Centripetal has it, and down it falls into the sun, and this... Do we come in the way, I wonder? The light of that day went the way of its brethren, and with the later watches of the frosty darkness rose the strange star again. And it was now so bright that the waxing moon seemed but a pale yellow ghost of itself, hanging huge in the sunset. In a South African city, a great man had married, and the streets were alight to welcome his return with his bride. "Even the skies are illuminated," said the flatterer. Under Capricorn, two African lovers, daring the wild beasts and evil spirits for love of one another, crouched together in a canebrake where the fireflies hovered. "That is our star," they whispered, and felt strangely comforted by the sweet brilliance of its light. The master mathematician sat in his private room and pushed the papers from him. His calculations were already finished. In a small white phial there still remained a little of the drug that had kept him awake and active for 4 long nights. Each day, serene, explicit, patient as ever, he had given his lecture to his students, and then had come back at once to this momentous calculation. His face was grave, a little drawn and hectic from his drugged activity. For some time he seemed lost in thought. Then he went to the window, and the blind went up with a click. Halfway up the sky, over the clustering roofs, chimneys and steeples of the city, hung the star. He looked at it as one might look into the eyes of a brave enemy. "You may kill me," he said after a silence, "but I can hold you, and all the universe for that matter, in the grip of this little brain. I would not change, even now." He looked at the little phial. "There will be no need of sleep again," he said. The next day, at noon, punctual to the minute, he entered his lecture theatre, put his hat on the end of the table as his habit was, and carefully selected a large piece of chalk. It was a joke among his students that he could not lecture without that piece of chalk to fumble in his fingers, and once he had been stricken to impotence by their hiding his supply. He came and looked under his grey eyebrows at the rising tiers of young, fresh faces, and spoke with his accustomed, studied commonness of phrasing. "Circumstances have arisen, circumstances beyond my control," he said, and paused, "which will debar me from completing the course I had designed. It would seem, gentlemen, if I may put the thing clearly and briefly, that man has lived in vain." The students glanced at one another. Had they heard aright? Mad? Raised eyebrows and grinning lips there were, but 1 or 2 faces remained intent upon his calm, grey-fringed face. "It will be interesting," he was saying, "to devote this morning to an exposition, so far as I can make it clear to you, of the calculations that have led me to this conclusion. Let us assume—" He turned towards the blackboard, meditating a diagram in the way that was usual to him. "What was that about lived in vain?" whispered one student to another. "Listen," said the other, nodding towards the lecturer. And presently they began to understand. That night the star rose later, for its proper eastward motion had carried it some way across Leo towards Virgo, and its brightness was so great that the sky became a luminous blue as it rose, and every star was hidden in its turn, save only Jupiter near the zenith, Capella, Aldebaran, Sirius, and the pointers of the Bear. It was very white and beautiful. In many parts of the world that night a pallid halo encircled it about. It was perceptibly larger. In the clear, refractive sky of the tropics it seemed as if it were nearly a quarter the size of the moon. The frost was still on the ground in England, but the world was as brightly lit as if it were midsummer moonlight. One could see to read quite ordinary print by the cold, clear light, and in the cities the lamps burnt yellow and wan. And everywhere the world was awake that night, and throughout Christendom a sombre murmur hung in the keen air over the countryside, like the belling of bees in the heather, and this murmurous tumult grew to a clangor in the cities. It was the tolling of the bells in a million belfry towers and steeples, summoning the people to sleep no more, to sin no more, but to gather in their churches and pray. And overhead, growing larger and brighter as the earth rolled on its way and the night passed, rose the dazzling star. And the streets and houses were alight in all the cities. The shipyards glared, and whatever roads led to high country were lit and crowded all night long. And in all the seas about the civilized lands, ships with throbbing engines and ships with bellying sails, crowded with men and living creatures, were standing out to ocean and the north. For already the warning of the master mathematician had been telegraphed all over the world and translated into 100 tongues. The new planet and Neptune, locked in a fiery embrace, were whirling headlong ever faster and faster towards the sun. Already every second this blazing mass flew 100 miles, and every second its terrific velocity increased. As it flew, now, indeed, it must pass 100 million of miles wide of the earth and scarcely affect it. But near its destined path, as yet only slightly perturbed, spun the mighty planet Jupiter and its moons sweeping splendid round the sun. Every moment now the attraction between the fiery star and the greatest of the planets grew stronger. And the result of that attraction? Inevitably, Jupiter would be deflected from its orbit into an elliptical path, and the burning star, swung by his attraction wide of its sunward rush, would describe a curved path and perhaps collide with, and certainly pass very close to, our Earth. Earthquakes, volcanic outbreaks, cyclones, sea waves, floods, and a steady rise in temperature to I know not what limit. So prophesied the master mathematician. And overhead, to carry out his words, lonely and cold and livid, blazed the star of the coming doom. And to many who stared at it that night until their eyes ached, it seemed that it was visibly approaching. And that night, too, the weather changed, and the frost that had gripped all Central Europe and France and England softened towards a thaw. But you must not imagine, because I have spoken of people praying through the night, and people going aboard ships, and people fleeing towards mountainous country, that the whole world was already in a terror because of the star. As a matter of fact, use and want still ruled the world, and save for the talk of idle moments and the splendour of the night, 9 human beings out of 10 were still busy at their common occupations. In all the cities, the shops, save one here and there, opened and closed at their proper hours. The doctor and the undertaker plied their trades, the workers gathered in the factories, soldiers drilled, scholars studied, lovers sought one another, thieves lurked and fled, politicians planned their schemes. The presses of the newspapers roared through the night, and many a priest of this church and that would not open his holy building to further what he considered a foolish panic. The newspapers insisted on the lesson of the year 1000, for then, too, people had anticipated the end. The star was no star, mere gas, a comet, and were it a star it could not possibly strike the earth. There was no precedent for such a thing. Common sense was sturdy everywhere, scornful, jesting, a little inclined to persecute the obdurate fearful. That night, at 7:15 by Greenwich time, the star would be at its nearest to Jupiter. then the world would see the turn things would take. The master mathematician's grim warnings were treated by many as so much mere elaborate self-advertisement. Common sense at last, a little heated by argument, signified its unalterable convictions by going to bed. So too barbarism and savagery, already tired of the novelty, went about their nightly business, and save for a howling dog here and there, the beast world left the star unheeded. And yet, when at last the watchers in the European states saw the star rise, an hour later it is true, but no larger than it had been the night before, there were still plenty awake to laugh at the master mathematician, to take the danger as if it had passed. But hereafter the laughter ceased. The star grew. It grew with a terrible steadiness, hour after hour, a little larger each hour, a little nearer the midnight zenith, and brighter until it had turned night into a second day. Had it come straight to the earth instead of in a curved path, had it lost no velocity to Jupiter, it must have leapt the intervening gulf in a day. But as it was, it took 5 days altogether to come by our planet. The next night it had become a third the size of the moon before it set to English eyes, and the thaw was assured. It rose over America near the size of the moon, but blinding white to look at, and hot, and a breath of hot wind blew now with its rising and gathering strength, and in Virginia and Brazil and down the St. Lawrence Valley it shone intermittently through a driving reek of thunderclouds, flickering violet lightning, and hail unprecedented. In Manitoba was a thaw and devastating floods, and upon all the mountains of the earth the snow and ice began to melt that night, and all the rivers coming out of high country flowed thick and turbid, and soon, in their upper reaches, with swirling trees and the bodies of beasts and men, they rose steadily in the ghostly brilliance, and came trickling over the banks at last, behind the flying population of their valleys. And along the coast of Argentina and up the South Atlantic the tides were higher than had ever been in the memory of man, and the storms drove the waters in many cases scores of miles inland, drowning whole cities. And so great grew the heat during the night that the rising of the sun was like the coming of a shadow. The earthquakes began and grew until all down America, from the Arctic Circle to Cape Horn, hillsides were sliding, fissures were opening, and houses and walls crumbling to destruction. The whole side of Cotopaxi slipped out in one vast convulsion, and a tumult of lava poured out so high and broad and swift and liquid that in one day it reached the sea. So the star, with the wan moon in its wake, marched across the Pacific, trailed the thunderstorms like the hem of a robe, and the growing tidal wave that toiled behind it, frothing and eager, poured over island and swept them clear of men, until that wave came at last, in a blinding light and with the breath of a furnace, swift and terrible it came, a wall of water 50 feet high, roaring hungrily upon the long coasts of Asia, and swept inland across the plains of China. For a space, the star, hotter now and larger and brighter than the sun in its strength, showed with pitiless brilliance the wide and populous country. Towns and villages with their pagodas and trees, roads, wide cultivated fields, millions of sleepless people staring in helpless terror at the incandescent sky. And then, low and growing, came the murmur of the flood, and thus it was with millions of men that night, a flight no whither, with limbs heavy with heat, and breath fierce and scant, and the flood like a wall swift and white behind, and then death. China was lit, glowing white, but over Japan and Java and all the islands of Eastern Asia the great star was a ball of dull red fire, because of the steam and smoke and ashes the volcanoes were spouting forth to salute its coming. Above was the lava, hot gases and ash, and below the seething floods, and the whole earth swayed and rumbled with the earthquake shocks. Soon the immemorial snows of Tibet and the Himalaya were melting and pouring down by 10 million deepening converging channels upon the plains of Burma and Hindustan. The tangled summits of the Indian jungles were aflame in 1,000 places, and below the hurrying waters around the stems were dark objects that still struggled feebly and reflected the blood-red tongues of fire. And in a rudderless confusion, a multitude of men and women fled down the broad riverways to that one last hope of men, the open sea. Larger grew the star, and larger, hotter, and brighter with a terrible swiftness now. The tropical ocean had lost its phosphorescence, and the whirling steam rose in ghostly wreaths from the black waves that plunged incessantly, speckled with storm-tossed ships. And then came a wonder. It seemed to those who in Europe watched for the rising of the star that the world must have ceased its rotation. In 1,000 open spaces of down and upland, the people who had fled thither from the floods and the falling houses and sliding slopes of hill watched for that rising in vain. Hour followed hour through a terrible suspense, and the star rose not. Once again men set their eyes upon the old constellation they had counted lost to them forever. In England it was hot and clear overhead, though the ground quivered perpetually, but in the tropics Sirius and Capella and Aldebaran showed through a veil of steam. And when at last the great star rose near 10 hours late, the sun rose close upon it, and in the centre of its white heart was a disk of black. Over Asia it was the star had begun to fall behind the movement of the sky, and then suddenly, as it hung over India, its light had been veiled. All the plain of India, from the mouth of the Indus to the mouths of the Ganges, was a shallow waste of shining water that night, out of which rose temples and palaces, mounds and hills black with people. Every minaret was a clustering mass of people, who fell one by one into the turbid waters as heat and terror overcame them. The whole land seemed a wailing, and suddenly there was swept a shadow across that furnace of despair, and a breath of cold wind, and a gathering of clouds out of the cooling air. Men looking up, near blinded at the star, saw that a black disk was creeping across the light. It was the moon, coming between the star and the earth, and even as men cried to God at this respite, out of the east with a strange inexplicable swiftness sprang the sun. And then star, sun and moon rushed together across the heavens. So it was that presently, to the European watchers, star and sun rose close upon each other, drove headlong for a space, and then slower, and at last came to rest. Star and sun merged into one glare of flame at the zenith of the sky. The moon no longer eclipsed the star, but was lost to sight in the brilliance of the sky, and those who were still alive regarded it for the most part with that dull stupidity that hunger, fatigue, heat and despair engender. There were still men who could perceive the meaning of these signs. Star and earth had been at their nearest, had swung about one another, and the star had passed. Already it was receding, swifter and swifter, in the last stage of its headlong journey downward into the sun. And then the clouds gathered, blotting out the vision of the sky. The thunder and lightning wove a garment round the world. All over the earth was such a downpour of rain as men had never before seen, and when the volcanoes flared red against the cloud canopy, there descended torrents of mud. Everywhere the waters were pouring off the land, leaving mud-silted ruins, and the earth littered like a storm-worn beach with all that had floated, and the dead bodies of the men and brutes, its children. For days the water streamed off the land, sweeping away soil and trees and houses in the way, and piling huge dikes and scooping out titanic gullies over the countryside. Those were the days of darkness that followed the star and the heat. All through them, and for many weeks and months, the earthquakes continued. But the star had passed, and men, hunger-driven and gathering courage only slowly, might creep back to their ruined cities, buried granaries, and sodden fields. Such few ships as had escaped the storms of that time came stunned and shattered and sounding their way cautiously through the new marks and shoals of once familiar ports. And as the storms subsided, men perceived that everywhere the days were hotter than of yore, and the sun larger, and the moon shrunk to 1/3 of its former size, took now 80 days between its new and new. But of the new brotherhood that grew presently among men, of the saving of laws and books and machines, of the strange change that had come over Iceland and Greenland and the shores of Baffin's Bay, so that the sailors coming there presently found them green and gracious, and could scarce believe their eyes, this story does not tell. Nor of the movement of mankind now that the earth was hotter northward and southward towards the poles of the earth. It concerns itself only with the coming and the passing of the star. The Martian astronomers, for there are astronomers on Mars, although they are very different beings from men, were naturally profoundly interested by these things. They saw them from their own standpoint, of course. Considering the mass and temperature of the missile that was flung through our solar system into the sun, one wrote, it is astonishing what a little damage the Earth, which it missed so narrowly, has sustained. All the familiar continental markings and the masses of the sea remain intact, and indeed the only difference seems to be a shrinkage of the white discoloration, supposed to be frozen water, around either pole, which only shows how small the vastest of human catastrophes may seem at a distance of a few million miles. The end. Thank you for listening. Now I need to stretch everything. So there we go. Yeah. It's not a fun one, but I like that one. He said of the story about Earth getting almost completely obliterated by a star just blasting through. Oh, you're welcome then. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. But yes, that was eerily timely. Just, well, yeah, like a little bit. I feel like there are perhaps a number of for something that is effectively talking about just sheer cosmic misfortune, right? Like a star of that form blasting through the solar system and almost eradicating Earth isn't really something you can guard yourself against, right? That's not, say, a climate change issue, but I feel like perhaps a number of the points that it raises and the things that it says about us and society are perhaps somewhat relevant. It's interesting how obsessed people were around the turn of the century with stuff from space crashing into / narrowly missing Earth. It is, isn't it? I don't have like really more to add to that other than that does seem to be a thing. And thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Again, thank you for listening. I enjoy reading that one. But as is probably audible, my voice is starting to get a little bit tired. How dare our planet be fine during the largest human catastrophe ever? Yeah, exactly. Well, it was from alien observation, it's completely fine. IRL, when Halley's Comet passed by in 1910, there was some real panic about the fact that the Earth would pass through the comet's tail, stirred up by sensationalist press. Sensationalist press doing that? I don't believe you. How shocking. Right. well, that brings us to the end of the stream. So, I guess we're going to end the stream. Is that Stephen on or something? Or how is best for me to check? Wait, what, just maybe just click raid channel. Is that? Oh, does that? Because I don't use these buttons. Oh, similar or small as that. Oh, what?
No one's on who was following. Usually it comes up with the following thing.
Oh, okay. Well then, no matter. Then we are going to go. There's a Moomin book about a comet. Sick. Yeah, no, I Moomins, I'd not actually added the discussion. Like, used to watch the Moomin cartoon as a child. Although I'm sure I had different music to the stuff that I could find, so I don't know if I just misremember things. But yeah, Moomins are cool. Moomins was fun. But we're going to go. So, thank you all for being here, for listening, for being the wonderful audience that you always are. Time for bed now. You had your bedtime story. Now go sleep. But yeah, do come back tomorrow for day 5, yes, of book week, where Lucy has some ambitions of doing a stream about literature and music and stuff. Yeah, so come back for that. Look forward to that tomorrow. And then on Tuesday, the day after, I will be reading some 10-minute stories by Algernon Blackwood, and we're just going to try and bang through a bunch of those, which will be a good time. Probably not all of them the best, but there might be some good ones in there. Who knows? Well, let's all find out together. But for now, when I can find the mouse, where's the mouse cursor? Okay, good. My vision is based on movement. I'm going to go. So thank you all for being here. Look after yourselves. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Try to stay cool. You're cool. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.